Welcome everyone in this new live development video about building an auto battle game. In this video, we're not going to do anything in the project. We're going to talk about the tech design behind the ability system. I cleaned up a bit the tech design diagram, so it's going to be easier to follow. If you don't want to listen to that, you can skip that video and no worries, nothing's going to be done in the project. Oh yes, yeah. What I've done is I've added the stat. I've added the level stat. So I opened up the enumerator stat. I added one new stat level. Then I added it to the data table of the stats, and I imported new icons for some of the stats. So that's pretty much what I've done, except from that. That's how you can add stats to your project. Except from that, I haven't done anything else. So if you don't want to listen to the tech design, you can skip that video. But I highly recommend that you follow it because the system I've designed is actually really modular, and it's gonna allow us to do many things. And it took me like 1 week to figure some of the details. I think some of the things, I think it's not perfect. Of course, like any system, it will prevent us from doing something, but we gain the possibility to do. Since it's modular, some things are just not possible. But since it's modular, it also allows us to create many abilities on the fly. And since it's all going to be like multiplayer, and since it has a lot of logic behind this, I think it will teach you many things about how you can build and think about your system in advance, and how you can check against real games if your system can support what other games do. So yeah, so let's dive right into it. The main point is going to be the ability manager. So this is going to be an actor component, which any actor which can basically do things in the game, things such as attacking, interacting, etc., casting an ability. It's going to have an ability manager, and it's going to be a replicated actor. That first point is going to be some kind of, which, since it's replicated, it increases the cost of spawning units in the game, combat units. And it can be an issue, and I've done it this way because this way it makes the ability system separated from the combat units. And we lose a little bit of performance, but we gain many things. We gain the ability to plug this to other things than combat units, and maybe to drag and drop that in another project, because it's really an ability editor that we're going to set up. So yeah, this is replicated. This is going to encapsulate the entire ability logic. That's why I wanted to split it from the combat unit. So it's going to keep track of what abilities we have. It's going to get and scale ability stats. So for instance, if an ability does damage, the ability manager is going to read the damage property of the ability and check out how that damage is supposed to be scaled. For example, if the ability is level 2, or if the unit has some kind of buffs which increase the damage of the ability, then the ability manager is going to take care of that. It's going to cast ability. What does that mean? This means it's going to trigger, it's going to multicast the ability a unit is supposed to perform, to cast. So this is the only thing that we need to replicate in this entire system. It's the fact that a unit has started an ability, and the ability manager is going to multicast that, so everyone is going to see the ability in action. And it's also going to handle every effect of the abilities, so it's going to have stuff like deal damage, etc. in here. and it's going to use them depending on what ability we're casting. It's also going to take care of every passive abilities we have and every statues our abilities have spawned. So replicate start end of abilities, that's what I was saying earlier. I can delete that. Deal damage, I've told that. Fetch target, apply effect. So our abilities are going to need to know what targets they need to apply effects such as damage to. And the ability manager is going to take care of this. So abilities are going to have properties such as how should I target people? How should I detect the target of my spell? So for instance, an area of effect. And so the ability is just going to have the information that we should be using an area of effect targeting system, and the ability manager is going to take care of that. So it's going to grab the units in question and return them so we can apply the effects to them. And it's going to count the different timers abilities have inside them. It's going to take care of the requirements. Can the unit use the ability, depending of if you have the tribe, if you have the bonus. So for instance, we will be able to say that this ability is unavailable until you have some kind of bonus, like, I don't know, 3 orcs and 4 orcs. It's going to enable a rage, for instance. And it's going to spawn status effects and stuff like that. So status are going to be everything from buff to debuffs to crowd controls and stuff like that. So the ability manager is going to be, like I was saying, an actor component. We're going to plug that to a combat unit. And it's going to spawn an object. Objects are cheap to spawn, pretty cheap. They cost almost no money, no performance. So for each ability a units can use, we're going to have one object representing that ability in the world. So if we have 10 lancers, 10 bowmen with 10 ability like rain of arrows, we're gonna have 10 objects, 10 new ability objects, rain of arrows in the world. And this object is going to hold the stats and the modifiers of the ability. It's going to also hold the row. Oh, it's not going to hold the row, my bad. So that object is going to hold some information regarding the ability. And we're going to be able to code some custom effects in there, among other things. This is going to have 2 child, active ability and passive abilities, which are going to hold all the static information of our abilities. And to understand that, we're gonna have to check out how are we going to create our abilities. I mean, set up the properties of our abilities. And we're going to do that in data table. Active abilities and passive abilities, we're gonna have the possibility to have several data table, but for the example, to hold all of our abilities. But for the example here, we're only gonna have one of each. And in that data table, we're gonna have a huge structure to fill, which is going to be one active ability, which is going to have name, description, icon, requirements of, like I was saying, the requirements to use them. So it's gonna have this, it's gonna have a cooldown, cost, range, duration, animation, trigger. We're gonna go back to that trigger. This is when is the ability supposed to trigger. So in most auto battler games, you have many different types of triggers, such as when a friend is low, when an enemy starts an ability or stuff like that. So we're going to be able to specify that our abilities trigger at specific times. Acquisition rules, this is going to determine what is the target of our ability. Trigger condition, this is going to drive if our trigger condition, I think it's already contained within the trigger, so we don't need to have trigger condition here. Cast type is if the ability is a one-time event, so like I throw an animation and it does stuff, or I keep doing, I keep channeling an ability. Does it prevent me from doing other things such as moving? Does it reduce my movement speed? What FX we're supposed to see? Special effects, sounds, stuff like that. Do we have to switch to another ability? So for instance, the first time I use my ability, it triggers a cleave effect, and then it switches to throw potion. Then I throw the potion, then it switches back to cleave, etc. So we can switch from an active ability to another. Do I have to rotate towards my target? Do I have to move towards my target in range? So this is gonna be the way for us to create new abilities. We're going to be able to specify all of this. And then you might wonder, okay, that's only one part of the ability. Yep, absolutely. This ability is composed of a series of events. I forgot to put that. This is gonna be here. So an ability is a series of events, of ability events. So what that is, so my ability triggers, I perform an animation, and then we're gonna have a map of float. So we're going to be able to specify 0.5 seconds after the beginning of the animation. We're going to have a bunch of effects triggering, and we will be able to set up several events. So for instance, I do something like Blizzard. So but it's not a channeling. It's not a channeling ability. So I just the unit mana reaches 100, so it launches Blizzard. So it starts an animation, and at 0.5, 1 second, 1.5, 2 seconds, 2.5, it's going to trigger effects with a Blizzard. Everything you see in this document called Juice is actually effects, special effects and sound effects. So every 0.5 seconds, it's going to trigger a Blizzard wave, targeting all units in the area and dealing damage. So an ability event is composed of FX. Targeting, how are we going to choose to detect the targets which are going to be, which we are going to apply these effects to. So targeting ability. How do we target them? How do we target people? With raycast, with a sphere, with an homing projectile, or just the target of our active ability. Custom targeting method, if we want, so this should have a custom, or maybe we don't even need that. So if we want to return a specific target, we can specify a custom target here. This allows us some flexibility if we want to override these targeting methods. How many times it should trigger? So for instance, for our Blizzard, we might set 6 times every 0.5 seconds. It's gonna trigger these things. So the Blizzard wave and the damage effects. What is the maximum amount of targets this targeting system can return? 1 or 0 for an infinite amount. Where is the origin of the targeting method? What is the direction of the targeting method? Different stats for the targeting method, the range, the radius, the angle, the speed, because it can be like something like a cone. So the angle of the cone and the length of the cone, maybe, I don't know, we'll have a bunch of stats here which we can specify. Transform offsets, this will be, we'll see in time, this will make us able to modify the origin based on the amount, on the tick amount. We'll see why it's useful later on. Targeting condition, we will be able to set up some stuff to make sure that the target we find using the targeting methods are valid for our ability. So for example, maybe we have an ability which only triggers against units which have 50% less, 50% or less than else. And if we want our targeting system to only return these, for instance, we do on area of effect, so a sphere, we find 5 targets in this sphere. It's gonna go through the condition filter. It's gonna check if they have 50% less else. And if they don't, they're going to be excluded from the targeting system, from the targeting of that ability. And then the targets, the type of targets we're looking for. Are we looking for ourselves, so the caster of the ability, allied units, enemies units, alive, dead, organic, or mechanicals? We will be able to have other things. So it's going to automatically filter them out of the research system, detection system. And then apply effect over time. That's not for that. That's not for damage over time or stuff like that. That's we'll see in time, but basically if you have an area of effect, maybe you don't want all the units in the area of effect to be damaged at once. Maybe you want them to be damaged progressively, depending on how far they stand away from the origin of the area. And this is going to make us able to... I've thought about that, and maybe this will make us able to simulate some kind of progression of effects over the distance, and apply effects only when we should, based on distance of the from the origin. Okay, so that's it for the targeting. So now we know what target are going to be hit by our active ability, but what do they do? What are they going to suffer? So we call that effects. We can plug as many effects as we want in that ability event. What type of effects? It can damage, heal, apply a status, summon units, knockback, cleanse, dash, teleport, or custom effect. All of these are going to be hard-coded. All of these effects are going to be hard-coded in the ability manager, what they do. And custom, we will be able to specify custom effects, and specify it here, which is going to be an object, custom ability effects. And if we wanna... If we have something that is really specific to an ability, we will be able to give it a specific effect. Stat value is basically going to be how much damage I'm supposed to deal, how much heal I'm supposed to heal, and stuff like that. I'm not sure about this. Maybe it's just going to be an array of stats here. I'm not sure. We'll see. All that tech design is... I haven't tested exactly that tech design. I've already tried many ability systems, and this one is the product of all my experiences, but I'm not 100% sure of how everything is going to unfold. So I'm going to apply this effect. We're going to apply this list of effects, so we can damage, heal, etc. of that amount. Duration, you might wonder, why do we have duration here? Well, that might just be a stat like damage or heal amounts, the duration of the summon, the duration of the status, or stuff like that. Amount, this is the amount of summon we have, the amount of... so this is also a stat. So we might say just damage, duration, amounts, etc. Spawned object, so what is the summon type? Transform offset. So the targeting system usually returns us with a target actor or target actors, and locations or location, and we can offset from that or location to choose where is our effect triggering. So for example, our summon, we can offset the spawn transform of the summon. Effect juice, this is the SFX. What effects and sounds we are supposed to attach to all targets being hit by this effect. And the effect condition, we can, like the targeting condition, we can pass... do we do this here as well? Maybe we don't need to have a condition here if we have a condition in the targeting, except if we have effects which are triggering without a targeting system, which might be the case. So I'm just going to double check that. Damage apply effects. Okay, target apply effect. Okay, apply status effect. Yeah, effect juice, additional effects. Yeah. Yeah, in here we might have an issue. I think it's going to be additional events in here. Don't ask me why right now. We'll go over this. I didn't like the fact that I changed. I can no longer search. But yeah, I think that in effect here we don't need a condition since we already filtered out the targets we didn't want. We'll see if we need a condition here. We might add one later. So this is how an active ability works. It has a bunch of things regarding when and how is the ability triggering. Then we're checking what targets we should be applying effects to. Then we're applying a bunch of effects to them, and the stat manager is taking care of what this does. For instance, reducing the stat health, etc., or increasing it, etc. So we're pretty happy about this. Now, how do passive ability works? Well, they are data within a data table as well. And they actually use a structure called passive ability, which has like active abilities, it has name, description, icon, and requirements. But it also has a bunch of event triggers, which are just triggers, a bunch of triggers, which are another type of things we're going to be checking at. We're going to check right now. So passive abilities basically can trigger a bunch of effects through triggers. Triggers are going to listen to game events and send information regarding them, so we can react and trigger effects and targeting effects such as we just see. So triggers are here. Event triggers, yeah. Event triggers are a structure composed of a trigger, which is exactly what I've just said, reacting to game events. We'll see that in a moment. Reacting to game events are all the time. So for example, a passive ability, where are we? A passive ability can have a trigger which is always there, and it has an event. What is an event? This is this. So all the time, it has a bunch of stat modifier, a tick amount, and a tick rate. So the passive ability can trigger at specific time or all the time. It can target units and apply effects to them. It can modify the stats of the owner of the ability. And when it triggers, it can tick a specific amount of times at a specific rate. What does that mean? That means that we can build a passive ability that has an event triggers, which says, so these are all the triggers we can have, which says when the unit dies, it triggers an event. What is an event? Something we've already seen. The ability event. It's something that can have SFX attached to it, which is going to target. So when my unit dies, it's going to explode and deal damage to all units around it. So it's going to target using a sphere. It's going to tick once, max target, unlimited target. The origin is going to be the location of the owner of the passive ability. The direction, no direction. The radius of the explosion. No targeting conditions. Targets only target enemies. And we're going to apply effects progressively apply effects progressively, and the effects, it's just going to say deal damage. So the passive ability says when I die, it triggers my events which says deal damage to all units around me. And maybe we want that to trigger like 3 times. So we're going to set tick amount 3, tick rate every 0.5 seconds, and 3 times explosions around me. And it's really more powerful than just triggering explosions around me. You can trust me, because we're going to check out the trigger system. So the event trigger, when does that trigger? We have different trigger types. So we have a structured trigger. We have different trigger types. What are the trigger types? It's always active when a specific timer ends. By a timer, you can specify here. When the entity we are looking at attack. So we can specify what entity we are looking at to trigger that. We can watch the owner of the ability, the target of the ability, all the allied units in the combat, all the enemy units in the combat, all the units in the combat, or the first unit who does our trigger. So the first unit who attacks, the first unit who hits, or when my target hits, or when my owner hits, or is attacked, take damage, when one of these stats has a stats which changes. So for example, when the total health of all allied units goes below 50%, I'm going to trigger these things. The trigger is going to occur. When I die, when the combat starts, when I enter a specific range around my owner or my target, some combination won't work, and we'll have to be aware of them. But it's really modular, granular, and allows us to do a lot of things. And we also have the ability to have a custom trigger and to cut this into an object, which is going to spawn if we specify a custom trigger. And the trigger is going to have a chance to trigger a condition, which is going to use the same base principles than this condition. And this is going to be able to make us able to specify what stats we check and what is the threshold we check. If we're on ability use, if we're looking at a specific ability, I'm not sure we need this. Maybe we need this. If we're looking at, maybe the trigger is only triggering when a passive ability trigger or an active one. And the range trigger, if we specify range enter, at how much distance that trigger should pop. So our passive ability has a bunch of event trigger, which have a bunch of trigger, which trigger a specific time, which can which can trigger the targeting system, which can trigger effects, I mean. Then it can also have a list of modifiers, which are stat modifiers. So to any passive ability, we can attach a bunch of stat modifiers. So for instance, a global damage buff or stuff like that. And in addition, passive ability also have a cast ability trigger. So what is this? So I've noticed that in many auto battler game, units add passive abilities such as when my target has less than 20% health, I perform a special strike that deals damage to all targets around me. And that sounds like a trigger in our tech design. That sounds like a trigger which perform an active ability, which is the cleave strike I just talked about. So I was like, okay, but that sounds like a passive ability, and maybe we want to add some kind of buff to that. So I can't just create an active ability, which is going to be the cleave thing. I need all the stuff regarding passive stuff. I needed passive. We need passive abilities because we need to be able to buff stats, to have aura effects and stuff like that. So I figured out we could have some kind of cast ability trigger within the passive ability, which is going to have a trigger. So when something happens, I'm going to trigger a specific active ability from the data table of active abilities, and it's going to have a built-in cooldown and cost within the passive ability. So that's pretty much it for that. So yeah, we've went over many things here, but it's we're far from we're not over yet. We're gonna build a little ability stat system. So this is kind of poor design because the abilities are not going to use the stat system we built in the previous videos, and that's not really modular, but it's going to use their own stat system. So for instance, when we create an ability in the data table, we can specify how much damage it deals, and we're gonna use this structure ability stat to specify how much damage it's dealing. So it's going to point towards stats. So in our case, it's going to be damage. So we're going to specify we want damage, the amount of damage we want to deal. And you can see there are brackets here because we will be able to specify as many values as we want. So for instance, I'm going to specify it's dealing 10, 20, 30, 40 damage because I know the ability has 4 levels and I want the ability to automatically know that it's going to use these values depending on what level I'm in, starting at 0. 0 is going to be level 1. So it's going to have a bunch of values. And we're going to be able to specify how this value is scaling. And this is going to be another structure which says every X, so every 1 point of else, I gain 3 of that stats, or 3% or 3 flat. So we're going to be able to scale abilities directly when we create them. So for instance, we know that some range we want to, to scale the range of an ability based on the power stats attribute of the units, then we'll be able to do it through ability scaling here. And also we will be able to create a custom object to scale the value, to have custom scaling effects, to be able to do things such as I do more damage based on the remaining amount of health, I do more damage based on the distance to the target, I deal more damage if the target is has already a poison effect on him, or stuff like that. We're gonna be able to use it this way. So this is how ability stats are going to work. And I've just talked about poison. And this is something I haven't talked about since the beginning of that video. These are statues. Oh yeah, I mentioned them, buffs and debuffs. We're going to call them statues. It's going to be anything that can modify a unit's stats, trigger effects, and remain for a specific amount of times. And we're going to have a data table of statues where we're going to be able to create all of our status, such as burn, stun, frozen, empowered, anything we want. And it's going to use a structure. So our status is going to have a name, an icon, description. It's going to have consumption rules. How is it supposed to, when is it supposed to end? Overtime, overtick, when a specific trigger occurs, when the when the target of the status exit a specific range, it can never end, or a specific or a custom consumption rules, which we can set up if we want. What does it trigger? So event triggers, we've already seen them when talking about passive abilities. Our status are going to have the same kind of abilities, the same kind of features, I mean. They're going to be able to trigger at specific times and trigger specific events, have modifiers, tick amount and tick rate. Do they trigger these events instantly when they are being applied? So for instance, I do a poison effect. It's called poison. It has a poison icon. It says I take 10 damage every second. Consumption rules over tick. So when the tick are, it's going to tick 4 times. So when the tick are over, the status is going to be over. Event triggers trigger on timer ends. On timer ends. Tick amount 4 times every 0.5 seconds. Events, it's going to deal damage to the target. So events, we've seen this. Targeting method, the target of the status. Effects, effective damage, custom damage, we can specify the value. How many stacks we can apply maximum of that to that status, and the duration of that status. And it has brackets because we can specify different duration and stacks based on the level of the ability which spawns the status. And status are also going to be U objects spawned within the world. So whenever we apply them, so we can keep track of the stats of the how many stacks the status has, if it has the raw information of that data table, what ability spawned that, and we can make child classes of this to have custom status such as stealth, elusive, or stuff like that. Stun would do strange things. So yeah. So I think we went over most. Yeah, we still have some things to go over here. We're also gonna have a child class of active ability, which is going to be attack ability. The attack ability is going to be the auto attack of a unit. And we're going to be able to specify the auto attack of a unit directly in the data table units, in the unit data table. So when we create a new unit, we're going to have a structure of attack ability to fill, which is going to specify how much damage, the attack speed, the range, and stuff like that, and many things. Does it splash, the tick amount, the tick rate, what effects does it have? Does it have additional events than just doing damage? And how is the AI supposed to target its main target for its main ability, for its main attack, I mean. And this is going to automatically create an active ability out of the property we put here. And this is made to avoid having to create all auto attack of units by hand using the active ability data table and specifying, and for example, for all melee attacks to do over and over targeting system. It's the target I want to hit, which is going to get hit. Effect, it's dealing damage. You get the point. So this is gonna allow us to be more, to create create units and their auto attack faster. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the tech design. One thing I wanted to do now is get Dota underloads, heroes, and go over some of the abilities of the heroes at random and see if we can make them with the tech design we've just done. So Midnight Pulse, what does it do? Steeps an area underneath the enemy with the highest max health in Dark Resonance. So when he reaches max mana, he casts the ability. So we can do this. And he spawns an area dealing damage. So I guess this means we have an active ability which triggers when the unit reaches max mana. It has acquisition rules, which says target the enemy with the most health, with the highest health. So we have the location behind a bit below the max health enemy unit. And we trigger an effect which is summon, which is going to summon an actor which has an ability manager, which has a passive ability, which is an aura. The trigger of the aura is going to be on range hunter, and it's going to apply a status. Whoops. And it's going to apply a status. So the effects of the trigger are going to be apply status. And it's going to be, what is the status going to do? Oh, the status is going to deal damage. And we're going to be able to tell how to scale the damage done based on the maximum amount of health the unit has. And it's going to, the status is also going to have a stat modifier, which is going to reduce, which is going to reduce their speed. The speed stat of the unit. So it charges across the battlefield, so that's a dash. It deals damage progressively with a recast from the origin of the dash to the arrival of the dash. And it scales the damage with a custom rules based on the distance traveled. So on ability, when a specific ability triggers, it applies a status called disarms to all units, to affected units, to units affected by Delta Slam. I'm not sure we can do, we target units that have been targeted by another abilities, unfortunately. But we can mimic the targeting system of the other ability to have the same target. So we gain overload. Casting a spell creates an electrical charge which is released in a burst on storm the next attack. So it's a passive which says when I attack, I deal 150 magical damage to my target, I guess. Yeah. And I apply a status which slows its attack speed stat for a duration. And maybe it has another trigger. Oh yeah, and maybe it has another passive ability which triggers the same kind of effects, but targeting different units. And we're gonna do another one. Oh well, that one was easy. We have a summon system and it can summon anything. That one was quite hard. I've already went through it. It's quite hard to imagine. It's a passive ability which stacks the same status over and over on the owner of the ability. And the ability has a specific scaling based on the amount of stacks the status has. That was quite hard to make. And we're gonna stop there. But you get, yeah, one axe was quite interesting. When attacked, axe has a chance to perform an helix counter attack. So that's a passive which has a trigger when I'm attacked. Trigger chance, we can specify different trigger chance based on weekends. So in here, we can put that under brackets. We have different trigger chance based on the level of the ability, and we can deal different damage to perform a helix counter attack. So that's a passive ability which has a cast ability trigger when I'm low on health, what is this? No, when I'm attacked, I trigger a specific active ability, which triggers a blow, which deals damage in a splash area. So yeah, and I've written all the things we have to create. We'll be using this later on. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. So that was quite a long video, and we've only talked, but I hope you got some kind of teachings from that video, because I feel like it's one of the most difficult things. Think about the system in advance. Think about what is going to allow us, what it's going to prevent us from doing. And because we're going to have to bear with these constraints from now to the rest of the rest of the project, because when you design such a big system like this, if you make mistakes or if you don't think ahead, you're gonna face constraints later in your design, and if you haven't planned them, well, you might be unable to do something that should necessarily be done or be able to do within your project, and you don't want that. So that's why you plan in advance, like we just done. And like I was saying, this is going to evolve as we do it, obviously, because things are not going to be as easy as I presented them. But this is quite a strong starting base. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed that video and hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.